it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Operation Appletree, Part 4. Chapter 21. We arrived back at HQ. Security raised the shutter door and Ruth reversed the car into the garage. As we sat waiting for the door to close behind us, Ruth gripped the steering wheel, turning it tightly in her hands out of stress. "So, what do we do?" she asked curiously. I pursed my lips and shook my head slowly. "I don't know, Ruth. I don't know. We don't have anything concrete. It's just a theory right now. But we keep what we think to ourselves, and we keep her under watch," I instructed. We didn't say another word. We both just shared a nod of confirmation. We exited the vehicle, Ruth and security helping me into my chair, and we made our way into the elevator. The doors closed behind us, and we began the ascent. "Stay cool. Keep a low profile, and let's get the evidence that we need," I said out loud. I wasn't addressing Ruth specifically, more the both of us. However, we had little time to react. As soon as the doors opened, Martinez, Folden, and Sarah came rushing down the corridor, all of them pulling on bulletproof vests. "What's happening?" Ruth exclaimed. "Oh, we got the evidence on Xavier. We're moving in. This is it, James," Martinez informed us excitedly. "Armed agents from the KC field office are meeting us outside the depot," he added, as Ruth and I just simply stared at him. "We don't have time to waste. You have to meet us there, Soup. We have to go," he said, rushing into the elevator. "Look, I'm not going to be of any use to you in this chair, and Ruth's not armed or S-trained. We'll stay here and provide tactical support," I suggested. "Good idea," Sarah said, Martinez nodding in agreement. "Right, back to back on Channel 2, okay?" he suggested, showing the radio. "Yeah, sure," I replied. The lift doors closed, and shortly after we heard the cars race out of the garage. Ruth turned to me, eyeing me curiously once again. "So, why aren't we going?" she inquired, and I started to wheel myself towards Sarah's office. "Because we're going to see if we can find anything that proves Sarah is Mr. X." Ruth quickly followed suit. We sat at Sarah's work-issued laptop, attempting to crack her password. After around 20 failed attempts at something simple like her birthday, all the way to guessing her favorite band, we became highly frustrated, deciding that it was hopeless. But just as we were beginning to give up, the radio crackled to life. "Hey, Soup, it's Martinez. Xavier was tipped off. He's on the run. I need ANPR cameras looking for his registered vehicle, and I also need a list of potential hideouts, distant relatives, holiday homes, and so on. All his information was gathered. Should be on her computer. Listen, the password is Gallagher 32, he instructed. It was here. I guess this was her mother's maiden name, coupled with the fact Sarah was 32 years of age. We opened it up, and we got him the information he needed. Sarah had gone to town on Xavier. No stone left unturned. There was a part of me praying she wasn't corrupt, because she is phenomenal at her job. "Hey, thanks, Soup. Stand by for further sitrep," Martinez said, signing back off, leaving me and Ruth to ourselves, with access to Sarah's laptop. If someone tipped him off," Ruth began to say before I finished her sentence. "Then it was someone in the task force." "Yeah," I said, shaking my head. I turned to face Ruth. Her face went from focused concentration to disturbed shock. "James," she said, pointing at the screen. I followed her finger to watch what she was looking at. On the screen was her search history. She'd been searching the federal database for Dennis Gordon and which prison he was in and what wing he was on. "Oh, fuck. Right, keep looking," I instructed. Ruth began incessantly typing away, going through everything she could think of. Whoa, stop. What's that? I snapped, nodding towards an email that was received 30 minutes before we'd entered the building. It had an audio attachment. We opened it. It was from the surveillance team, and read, "Urgent attention needed. Incriminating dialogue detected today at 14:43 p.m. We played the audio file, which was around a 49-second clip. "So, have you heard anything from the Sandy Marsh death? Getting a little nervous." "Don't worry about it. Spoke to Xavier. He said our backs are covered. He's signing it off as an accidental death. No one's going to be asking questions." "Okay, great." "Yeah, he said the task force is on its last legs. Soon this'll all be over and we get back to business as usual. But he said we did our part. Wants to meet today at 12. We get what we're promised." The recording ended there. We both looked at each other. "Oh, so that's what got the DOJ to sign off on breaking anonymity to arrest Xavier," Ruth speculated. "Yeah, but I thought the taps went dead, due to lack of evidence," I said, as Ruth continued scrolling down. "Hey, look," I said, pointing at another email, dated the day the taps were due to go dead. "Wiretap warrant extension for vehicles and home addresses for Detective Ryan and Officer Patrick accepted," was the subject line. We opened it. "Dear Sarah, after reviewing your proposal, we are willing to offer a conditional 2-week extension for the TAFs to remain active. However, this will not be granted for a third time. We will also review this after 1 week, and if there's no sign of incriminating evidence, then we may decide to cancel the warrant early. We wish you well in your investigation. Kind regards, Olivia Neal, Office of the Deputy Attorney General, United States Department of Justice." "So, why did Martinez say the taps weren't active?" Ruth questioned. "Well, maybe it's because he thought they weren't," I speculated. "Now, think about it. If we get Mr. X, break anonymity, the task force is as good as dead. Taking down Mr. X is as good as any RICO operation. He's the top of the chain, so theoretically, without him, the OCG falls. That'd be the only reason the DOJ would sign off. I don't doubt Xavier's dirty, otherwise why run? But, well, think about Marshall. He was dirty. He ran, but he wasn't rotten. But they set him up to be. Sarah, she put together everything on Xavier, pushing Martinez to arrest him. Then I came into that meeting the other morning and halted the plan, which, let's be honest, if it wasn't for you and Dennis Gordon, would never have happened. I tell everyone we can't act without evidence, and then suddenly she's asking for an extension on the wiretaps. She contacts Ryan and Patrick, gets them to incriminate Xavier on tape. Gives Martinez the green light to arrest. She's likely the one who tipped him off, so he can't say any different. With the task force depleted and the prime suspect on the run, the DOJ, well, they'll pull the plug. And she's done it. Just like the man on the laptop said they would. Yeah, but why would Ryan and Patrick incriminate themselves too? Surely they wouldn't agree to that, Ruth questioned. No, they didn't say anything that couldn't be twisted to sound like they weren't blackmailed by Xavier to ignore leads that could lead to Sandy Marsh's whereabouts. They just have to say Xavier pressured them into botching the search, with the promise that they'll be left alone once the task force isn't in town. They'll lose their job, but who knows what financial incentives were offered. It's on tape about Xavier, and not only that, but the task force is mentioned. The anonymity is gone. Look, we're on borrowed time, Ruth. It's up to us, now, to solve this, I stated. Ruth mulled over what I said. We need to get to Ryan and Patrick first. Offer them deals to tell us if they were commanded to incriminate Xavier. Well, this proves that Xavier isn't Mr. X, and it could buy us a little leeway with the DOJ, she instructed. I agreed. All right, come on, let's go, I said, wheeling over to Ruth and the door. However, just before we exited the office, we saw a notification on the box had just come through. James, look. I looked down at the screen and read that 2 bodies had been discovered in a burning car after a reported explosion in the Midtown, the Westport area, around 12:34 p.m. The bodies had just been preliminarily identified as Detective Ryan and Officer Patrick. I stared long and hard at the text on the screen and felt a rage building up inside me. Oh, fuck, I yelled at no one in particular. I picked up the radio and called in to Martinez. Martinez, sit rep.
Soup, Xavier still AWOL. He wasn't at his two owned residential addresses, but KCPD said they got a hit on his vehicle plate heading in the direction of one of the other places of interest you sent us. So we're heading up to the family's lake house, up at State Lake. We're en route now, ETA 45 minutes.
Hey, listen, Martinez. Sounds like Ryan and Patrick have been murdered. Just came up on the box, I informed him, reluctantly.
Oh, fuck,
he gasped. Yeah, it's clear the OCG are cutting ties with anyone that's been compromised by our task force.
Well, hopefully we get Xavier. He can make a deal to give them all up,
Martinez said, optimistically. Yeah, well, look, me and Ruth have a lead. Might be nothing, but it could be pivotal to our investigation.
What lead, Soup?
Martinez asked, intrigued. Ruth was wide-eyed, shaking her head at me, silently advising me not to tell him about Andre Lopez, given how he'd likely inform Sarah. Oh, just a potential witness who's in the area the night Kim and Sandy went to the flat. Probably just a time waster who's fishing for a reward. Worth following up, though. I conjured up on the spot.
Well, definitely. Hopefully it's real and they can give us something to tie Xavier to these murders. Hey, stay safe, Soup. Keep your radio on and take Sarah's laptop, just in case we need tech support, he commanded politely.
Yeah, absolutely, I assured him.
Over and out,
he stated before the radio went dead. Ruth was already out of her seat and opening the door when I looked up.
Come on, let's go.
Chapter 22. Our vehicle's wheels span and screeched against the tarmac as we sped out of the garage and onto the road, heading for the registered address of Andre Lopez. We arrived after around 25 minutes of tense silence as we both mulled over the recent developments. When we get there, I'll wait in the car. Keep a lookout. I'm not much use in this chair anyway, I suggested. Ruth nodded, but she looked a little apprehensive. We drove past the apartment complex slowly, scanning the area for an OCG presence. Thankfully, there was none. We drove the car around the block and parked up on the east side of the complex across the street. From here I could see the entrance to the communal gardens and the front of apartment 6D without anyone from the front of the complex seeing our vehicle. Any sign of life in there, you come back to the car and we leave. If it looks clear, then you go in. Look for anything of significance, take some photos, and we leave. Don't move or take anything, I commanded. Ruth inhaled deeply with nerves and exhaled in confirmation before she exited the vehicle and made her way around the block and into the complex of the apartments. I watched her walk into the communal gardens before heading up the steps to the front door of 6D. She followed her training to the letter and made sure no one was watching before she took out her bobby pin and picked the lock to the door. She'd been practicing, I thought to myself with a smile, even though this was technically and very illegal. Needs must, however. After 30 seconds of her fiddling with the lock, it clicked and Ruth made her way inside. I called Ruth on her cell, and a few rings later, she answered.
Hey, I'm in,
she informed me with a suppressed excitement.
Oh God, you can tell this guy's a criminal kingpin. Everything in here must be worth thousands. Honestly, James, I'm a little jealous, she said facetiously.
Come on, Ruth, concentrate. Look for anything that could link us to Sarah. Burners, laptops, dongles, or anything. Oh, we need this, I demanded.
Okay,
she assured me hurriedly.
Let's see. Burners.
She muttered to herself as I heard her going through the apartment, opening drawers and cupboard doors and so on. I sat there in tense silence, and I listened, waiting for any reply from Ruth, when suddenly I heard her say,
Oh, hold on. I think I might have something.
Ruth. Oh, what is it? I asked, but I got no response. Like a dark cloud looming over me, telling me something was wrong, it was at this point I noticed something rather unsettling. From my vantage point, I could see a black transit van pulling up outside the main entrance to the complex. 3 men climbed out of the van, wearing that all-too-familiar uniform synonymous with the OCG. They began hastily making their way towards the apartment which Ruth was currently inside. Shamefully, the terror of the situation caused my brain to delay in sending the much-needed messages to my mouth. On the other end of the phone, I could hear Ruth speaking, but it sounded like her mouth wasn't near the speaker. I could hear the sound of her iPhone snapping multiple images before I could hear her gasp to herself and mutter, "Oh my God, no. Oh, James, you aren't gonna believe this, but..." I didn't give her time to finish the sentence as my fear finally gave way and allowed me to act. I simply screamed into the phone as loud as I could, "Ruth, run." It was too late, though. They'd already burst into the apartment, and suddenly Ruth's phone went dead and I was forced to wait. I felt completely helpless. I could barely walk, let alone run to her aid. I couldn't do anything but watch. I grabbed the radio and immediately called in to HQ. 1019, 1019, I need urgent armed response and pursuit vehicles to 2929 McGee Street, Union Hills. 3 OCG, possibly armed. Immediate threat to life, I yelled into the radio, frantically. As HQ responded, confirming help was on the way, I saw the men exit the apartment, Ruth in tow. She was unconscious, her toes scraping along the floor as 2 of the men carried her out of the building and towards the van, whilst the third lit a match and threw it through the open door. And just like that, the building went up in flames, along with all our evidence and leads. The ARU wouldn't get here before Ruth was abducted, and I know what happens to people who get abducted. The thought scared the life out of me. But this time there was no hesitation, no delay in action. The adrenaline coursed through my veins and fractured limbs. I threw myself from the passenger seat into the driver's seat in a crumpled heap, groaning in pain as the agony pulsated in the cracks of my semi-healed bones. I didn't care, though. I needed to save Ruth. I fired the car to life, gripped the steering wheel as tight as my fractured hands would allow, and pressed my cast against the gas pedal. The car's spinning wheels, before finally the rubber grabbed the road and I went speeding after the van. The van screeched through the streets of Union Hill and through Penn Valley Park, with me in tow. A little all over the place as my casted hands and legs throbbed with agony as I squeezed the pedal and turned the steering wheel. Pedestrians were leaping out of the way. Lampposts and fire hydrants were set flying around the sidewalk as both vehicles tore towards the highway. Suspect vehicle traveling north on Monarch Highway 35. SSA Rodriguez in pursuit. Suspects have Agent Ruth Maddock hostage, traveling in a black transit van at rough speeds of 75 miles per hour. License plate is Sierra Whiskey Romeo 6429. I slammed the radio into the passenger seat and continued to pursue the van, which was swerving in and out of the traffic. Oh, the thought of never seeing Ruth again, should I not keep up with them, was far more painful than the agony pulsating through my nerves. I didn't care. James, are you there? It's Martinez. What's happening? A voice came echoing through the radio receiver. I fought through the pain to reach over to pick it up, and I screamed back into it. Yeah, I'm chasing the OCG. They took Ruth. I'm on the highway. I'm in pursuit. Tell HQ to track my phone. I'll be passing exit 15 in ETA 2 minutes, I replied urgently, dropping the receiver to concentrate on the task at hand. Roger, Martinez affirmed from my lap. The 2 vehicles had torn so rapidly through the traffic we were now on open road. Just me and them. A gunman in the passenger side aimed a pistol at me as I came close to the bumper of the van, trying to push the vehicle against the brickwork on the edge of the road, attempting to grind them to a halt. The problem was, I was a cripple with no backup. But all I knew was I didn't want Ruth to leave me. The gunman fired, puncturing my bonnet a few times and shattering the top right-hand corner of my windshield. Next, my passenger side mirror blew off. I maneuvered the vehicle out of his line of fire and continued pursuit. The exit was coming up, and the ARU would be able to join the pursuit, and we'd have a better chance of saving Ruth then. My heart totally sank, however, when the exit came up, and there was no sign of the backup as we passed the exit. They knew to track me, though, so all I had to do was stay with them, and everything would be okay. Everything had to be okay. Closed my eyes for a second, in a futile attempt to cope with the pain ravaging my entire body. But that was nothing compared to what I felt when I opened them. The group had opened the back door of the van, holding Ruth by the hair on her knees, teetering over the edge. The masked man held a pistol to the back of her head. Well, I didn't feel pain anymore, just pure adrenaline. I saw the fear in her face, with a hint of acceptance. I wasn't accepting it, though. I couldn't. Ruth was everything to me. I sped up as much as I could to try to do something, anything. One of the other men in the van had a burner phone to their ear. They nodded at whatever they were being told before finally hanging up, and then whispered in the gunman's ear. He took his seat back in the van, and the gunman simply stared at me and smiled, while my eyes widened in horror. Ruth was looking at me. She wasn't scared anymore. Her eyes were glassy as they filled up. She smiled at me and mouthed the words, "I'll wait for you." She closed her eyes. The gunman grinned. I screamed in helpless despair, and the trigger was pulled. A loud bang echoed across the Kansas City skyline. A large puff of blood and flesh popped into the air, and then Ruth hit the tarmac hard. I hit the brake as hard as possible, skidding all over the highway, finally coming to a screeching halt around 10 yards from Ruth's lifeless body. The van's doors were now closed, and they were out of sight within seconds. I flopped out of the driver's side door and began to crawl across the hot road surface towards Ruth's still form, using my forearms to drag myself to her. Tears were falling from my cheeks as the sight of her became clearer the nearer I got. Her dilated pupils centering her empty stare, the blood trickling down her forehead, dripping off the end of her nose. A part of me was praying she was still alive, but when I saw the pool of claret forming around the back of her head, I knew she was gone. As I hoisted her into my arms and cradled her head against my chest, the sound of sirens were fast approaching. They were coming from the north. They'd used the wrong exit. I was experiencing far too much grief, however, to think too much into it. I stroked the bloody-soaked hair of Ruth. Pieces of her were clinging to my fingers. I massaged her beautiful lips with my thumb, silently dying inside, knowing I'd never feel them on mine ever again. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Ruth," I said to her, my voice breaking. "I never told you how I actually felt. Oh, fuck, I should have told you sooner." My voice broke harder as the lump in my throat swelled up and my eyes began to ache. "Oh, Ruth, please wake up. Please don't leave me. I love you, do you hear me? I love you." I began to howl into the afternoon air as the realization of the last 20 minutes just hit me all at once, and the backup rushed over to us, along with the paramedics. They began to pull me off Ruth. I tried to fight them, but I was racked with so much pain and dismay that it was useless. They helped me over to the waiting ambulance. I'd likely set my recovery back 4 weeks, but, well, I didn't care. Cuts heal, bones set, and bruises fade. But I'll never see Ruth again. The final knife in the gut, though, came as I was laid on the gurney, being wheeled past my car. I looked down at the back left tire, and just there, peeking over the ridge of the wheel arch, was a GPS tracker. I felt sick. That fucking psychopathic bitch must have put it on our car when she left to arrest Xavier. They knew where we were. They knew we were on to Andre Lopez, one of the top men in the organization. And we had to be silenced. In my seething anger, I promised myself something. I'd get that fucking bitch. Chapter 23. When we arrived at the hospital, Martinez was waiting for me at the entrance, following me down the hallways as the doctors wheeled me into surgery to reset any bones that I'd rebroken. James, what on earth happened? What happened with the witness? Was it a trap? He asked frantically. Look, I lied to you. There was no witness. We found Pablo. Marshall kept video diaries of his interactions with the OCG. He even kept the CCTV from the Aura. We identified the man in it as Andre Lopez. We went to his address to try and find evidence of the identity of Mr. X, I said, wheezing in pain. Martinez simply stared at me, wide-eyed with shock. Okay, and... Someone put a tracker in our car. They knew we were there, so they sent some men to ambush us. Except because I was in a wheelchair, well, I sent Ruth in by herself. I began to sob then. I killed her, Marty. I killed her, I said, breaking down into tears. Oh no, come on, man. Come on. Don't do this to yourself. Those men killed her. You did everything you could. You drove a car with 4 broken limbs. Doctors are quite frankly amazed you managed to keep up with her as long as you did, Martinez said comfortingly. I didn't respond, though. I just continued to mourn Ruth. Martinez looked lost for words. He wanted to say the right thing, but he just didn't know what that was. I don't think such a thing existed. Hey, why did you lie to me about the lead? Is there something I should know, James? Martinez asked, a hint of annoyance to his concern. Sarah, she's Mr. X, and you have to stop her, I informed him bluntly. Martinez was shaken. He looked gobsmacked, like a kid getting told Santa isn't real. No, I know Sarah. I'm an FBI agent. If she was, I'd... Oh, gosh, she's on the way now to the cabin to arrest Xavier. He's Mr. X, not her. The way he was rambling, it seemed like he was trying to convince himself as well as me. I could tell the way his face was dropping and his stutters getting more potent, that all the pieces were falling into place. Oh, she used you. She got close to you because she knew that once Michaels was framed and I was murdered, and we were both out of the way, you'd move up and she could influence you. Ruth told her about a UCA embedded in the OCG. He was brutally murdered in Leavenworth yesterday. She had emails on her computer asking for an extension on the wiretaps. She even brought us the information on Ryan and Patrick, likely to use them as pawns throughout this investigation. When she didn't need them, she had them murdered. She set it all up, and I'll bet you any money that Xavier never gets the chance to tell his story. Where's Sarah now? I demanded to know. Martinez looked at me, horrified, realizing he'd been duped, used, and none of what they had was real. She's going to arrest Xavier now, he revealed with horror. What, alone? I snapped, jolting up sharply off the gurney before the pain slammed me back down. A few doctors saw my distress and began to rush over. No, Martinez muttered. Our agents were divided to assist you, so... Oh, she's with KCPD officers. And with that, it hit home and the penny dropped for both of us. And without even saying a word, Martinez knew exactly what to do. He pulled his radio from his belt and began to march down the hall to the exit. As the doctors came to wheel me into the theater, urging me to calm down and not move so much, I heard Martinez barking into his radio. This is an urgent call to any available Appletree personnel. We need immediate sighting and detention of Agent Sarah Mitchell. Now proceed with extreme caution. She is considered potentially armed and extremely dangerous. His orders became more harder to hear as he sprinted out of sight, and I was wheeled away into another room. The doctors then administered some strong pain relief, and I was out like a light shortly afterwards. I came around some time later to find Martinez sat at my bedside, head in hands. It took me a few seconds for the haze of the drugs and my fatigue to wash over, but once it did, it was clear he was extremely upset. He looked racked with grief, and, to be honest, once I remembered why I was actually where I was, mine came rushing back too. "Marty?" I asked, gaining his attention. He looked up sharply. He'd been crying a lot. My heart sank. Something was wrong again. "Oh, you're awake. Hey, how you feeling, Soup?" he asked, startled. "Sore, physically and emotionally. Still waiting for the doc to come round and fill me in," I informed him, and he scoffed gently. "Already asked. You're doing fine. Your shins had refractured, and most of your joints and your fingers and toes had to be reset. So other than setting your rehab back 4 weeks, you're going to be fine, well, physically anyway. How you bearing up?" he asked, genuinely concerned. I fought to hold back my emotions. I found it so hard to even just say the words out loud. It was like if I did, then it was real. I simply just looked away from Martinez's gaze and avoided answering. "Come on, Soup. You can't bottle it up. You guys were obviously close. You need to talk about it. Look, if you don't, it'll destroy you. Over time, it will, trust me," he said empathetically. Well, I knew he was right, but I wasn't good at this stuff. All the answers to my problems are usually found at the bottom of a spirit bottle. "Is Sarah in custody?" I asked bluntly, avoiding answering Martinez's question. Martinez kissed his teeth slowly before shaking his head in the same manner. "No," he said reluctantly. "No?" I snapped. "Yeah, she must have been tipped off. KCPD claims she left the scene in her vehicle before myself and HQ arrived. No sign of her vehicle, and her rented accommodation's empty. Passports, IDs, electronic devices are gone. She's underground." "You were right. She fucking duped me," he said, his voice cracking at the end, causing him to shy away from me so that I didn't see the tears. I was never good with other men showing their emotions around me. Old school, I guess. "Hey, she duped us all, my friend. I thought she was one of the good ones. Turns out she's the rottenest of all apples," I said comfortingly. "How am I meant to make it in the FBI when I can't even tell that my girlfriend is the leader of an organized crime gang?" "Hey, listen to me, Marty. You are a phenomenal agent, a leader in the making. I think when this is all over, I'm going to hang up my gloves. Well, with my rehab and everything, it just makes sense. Well, the point is, I'm going to need someone I can trust to fill my shoes." I shot Martinez a smile to assure him of my faith in him. "Are you serious?" he asked incredulously. "Oh, deadly. I've already written a letter of recommendation to the assistant director. When I step down, you'll step up," I told him with a wink. Martinez seemed to be pleased by this. He perked up, which I was obviously glad to see. "Thanks, Soup." There was something in his tone, however. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, like he was holding something back. "Hey, what aren't you telling me, Marty?" I probed. Well, my question seemed to catch him off guard, and he began to look uncomfortable. He composed himself and sighed. "Is it that obvious?" The Kansas field office reported that when they showed up, Xavier was hanging from the roof beams. He'd hung himself before he could be arrested. So now our operation is over. The real Mr. X is on the run, and the one high-profile arrest who could have given us the names from Lawrence is dead. Probably realized the game was up and didn't want to go to jail as a child abuser," Martinez ventured. I mulled over his speculation. "Or maybe the OCG gave someone the order to silence him," I replied. Martinez simply shrugged. "Well, either way, our operation's dead. Our anonymity is gone. Our prime suspect is missing, and all our best leads have wound up in the morgue. The AD's pulling the plug in 72 hours, Martinez revealed. I should have just accepted this, but all I heard was 72 hours. That meant I could focus on something other than the fact I just lost the love of my life. So, we got 72 hours to find Sarah then, I said with purpose. Well, Martinez looked a little baffled. Look, Super, with all due respect, she's gone. It's game over. Ford's already packed up and left for Chicago. You're in hospital. Marshall's dead. Michaels is still in prison, and Ruth... Martinez checked himself before he finished that sentence. But there's still you. I may be in this bed, but I can still be of assistance. Please, Martinez, I need this. I've got some friends in the CIA. They helped me find Pablo. They can help me find Sarah. We can still get this done, Marty. Me and you. You hear me? I want the bastards who killed Ruth. I want their heads on a fucking spike. Oh, I want... Sharp pain jolted through my nerves as my posture tensed upwards as I began to get irate, causing me to wince in pain. Whoa, Sue. Come on, you're in no condition. Just rest, Martinez demanded, ushering my back onto the pillow. No, we don't have time, I countered. Martinez saw there was no arguing with me. His demeanor seemed to show he'd conceded to my demands. Okay, well, look, I'll call Chicago, try and get Holden back. I'll call a few friends and see if they can spare a few man-hours to assist us. I'll be back tomorrow. See if the docs can get you mobile, Martinez said with a comforting pat on my shoulder. I conceded myself and nodded in agreement. Martinez smiled at me, wished me well, and left the room. So I was left in the room by myself, with nothing but my thoughts and my grief. I took out my phone and sent Sarah's profile and FBI images to Clive Davis, asking him to get me a last known sighting. Well, he came back to me rather quickly, explaining that if this was done, I'd pretty much owe him my life in favors. Well, so be it. That evening I was laid in bed, and the doc came in to see me, told me that, pending an x-ray, there's no reason to believe why I couldn't be out here and back in my chair in at least 48 hours, completing the final stages of rehab and physio as an outpatient back in San Antonio. Well, this was obviously good news, but it meant I had 48 hours of being confined to these four walls. He let me know the nurse would be round in an hour or two to top up my pain relief. I thanked him and he left. I was checking my phone for an email from Clive for around the 80th time, when there was a gentle knock at my room door. Come in, I yelled. The door opened sheepishly, and in stepped Officer Sarah Wilson. She shot me a gentle smile, and I responded with one of my own. Hi, Mr. Rodriguez. How are you feeling? I don't know if you remember me, she asked with an innocence that honestly warmed my aching limbs. I'm fine, Sarah. Yes, of course I remember you. And please, call me James. She took a seat on the chair by my bedside. I noticed she was cradling a large evidence bag in her lap. I, guess you heard about Ruth, I probed. She gave me a somber nod in acknowledgement. Yeah, she was phenomenal at what she did. They say never meet your heroes, but when I met her that day at HQ, she was everything I imagined. It was so bad what happened. I worked hard to save her from Danmore, all for those bastards to just take her from us in the blink of an eye. She was angry, frustrated, and full of rage, and I understood everything she was feeling. Well, I hope you know that what you did for her gave me and her a beautiful 2 months, and I can't thank you enough for that, I told her sincerely. Well, she seemed a little taken aback. What? You? Miss Maddock? You were a thing? She asked incredulously. Well, I scoffed and smiled. Yeah, we were going to be together properly when this was all over. Well, until... My emotions bubbled up from deep inside me and hit the surface, causing me to halt, finishing my sentence. I took a minute to compose myself and push those feelings back down where they came from. Well, you should let it out, you know. Bottling things up could give you some issues down the line. I knew she was right, but I was a stubborn old prick, so I changed the subject. Hey, what you got there, Sarah? I asked, gesturing towards the bag in her lap. Sarah looked down at it. Oh, it's something I thought you'd want to see, but now you've told me you two were involved, then, well, maybe you should have it, she said, handing over the package. As I examined it, I discovered it was Ruth's belongings that were on her person at the time of her death. Clothes, jewelry, and her phone were in the bag. You won't get in trouble for this? I inquired. Sarah scoffed. Hey, evidence goes missing from the KCPD all the time. Ain't no one gonna miss this, she assured me. Oh, it's a shame you never got to work with her, you know. She spoke very highly of you, I informed her, and this seemed to mean the world to her. She showed the rest of us that women are a force to be reckoned with in the world of law enforcement. She was a credit to herself, and I know her work and research will keep her memory alive forever. Damn, couldn't have put it better myself, I said with a smile. Right, I better get back to it. I'm on patrol and was just passing through. I hope you get well soon, sir, she said pleasantly before leaving the room. I opened the bag and pulled Ruth's clothes out. I could smell her perfume immediately. That powerful aroma of pure lust wafted into my nostrils, and for a brief second I was in heaven. However, a tear immediately formed in the corner of my eye when the smell was masked by the stench of iron and gunshot residue, and I was slammed back into the memory of her death. The look in her eyes, just before that man pulled the trigger. I didn't want to think about that, so I rummaged in the bag and pulled out Ruth's jewelry. I held it up and let it sparkle in the bright lights of the hospital room. I smiled at how beautiful and elegant she looked wearing it. I then saw the phone and pulled it out of the bag. I held the device in my hand and saw the background was of us, the night we wined and dined discussing this case. It made me smile and feel all warm inside. Well, that feeling was better than any morphine I was being injected with. I decided to look through the messages between myself and her. I didn't have long, the battery was almost dead. I read a few flirty texts and then some more meaningful ones. I even read some other message she sent to a friend from the university, explaining that she'd met the one. Oh, this was a double-edged sword. It felt good to read, but it was painful to know it would never happen. I then decided to look through the photos and look at ones of me and her. I opened up the file for March, when we'd eaten out. Oh, a magical night. I continued to scroll through, seeing images she took in the mirror of the hotel, outfits and such. Well, I admired the beauty of each and every one before moving on to the next. I was just on the photo of us in San Bernardino at the kebab restaurant waiting for the lawyer, when a male nurse entered the room. I looked up and gave him a non-verbal greeting by smiling and nodded at him. Just here to top up your morphine, James, he informed me politely, as he began filling up a syringe from a bottle. I turned my attention back to the phone to distract myself from the needle. Even with the cannula, just the sight of them brought me back to those childhood vaccinations I'd used to dread. I slid the image to the left one more time, and what I saw instantly changed my mood. The images were no longer of myself and Ruth having fun times, or just Ruth snapping selfies. This was of a bedroom. The image was dark, but I could make out a dresser with a photo frame, a lamp, and around 6 unregistered cell phones, aka burners. As I saw the file had one more photo to see, I recalled back to the last time I'd spoken to Ruth before she was abducted. At one point in the call, I could tell her phone was away from her face. She must have been taking photos of what she could see. But what I did remember from the conversation was Ruth seemingly becoming incredulous at what she could see. She seemed to be shocked beyond belief by something. And this is when I slid the screen to the left, one more time. And it was then I knew why she had the reaction she did. The final image was a close-up of the photo on the dresser. The photo depicted 2 men, both of Mexican heritage. Their arms were around each other's shoulders and they were smiling. I recognized both men. The one on the left matched the image from the CCTV at the Aura nightclub. Andre Pablo Lopez. The one on the right, none other than Special Agent Anthony Martinez. My heart was pounding so hard, realizing that Sarah wasn't Mr. X, it was Martinez. I didn't even remember where I was. Suddenly I remembered then and turned to look at the nurse, who was aiming the needle, preparing to insert the point into my cannula. I scanned his body and clothes until my gaze landed on his ID badge. My eyes widened and my heart sank when I realized the image of the man on the badge wasn't the man in the room. I acted quickly and threw myself off the bed and into the man, knocking him to the floor and sending the needle, filled with God only knows what, spinning across the floor. A struggle ensued, the man with 4 healthy limbs quickly gaining the top position. He grabbed a wire and began to wrap it around my neck and drove his weight down. All the strength I'd found that day to drive the car simply wasn't there. I didn't want to live in a world without Ruth. I would have done anything to keep her alive, so maybe going quietly into the night wouldn't be so bad. My feet thrashed around, desperately trying to knock this hitman off of me. As my eyes began to bulge and the blood vessels started to burst, I caught sight of the emergency button laying on the floor in a pile of wires, tubes, and sheets. I thrashed my legs up and down, desperately trying to hit the button. I was literally millimeters away when the man shifted his position so I couldn't see it anymore. I continued to thrash, but time was running out. The blood and oxygen wasn't reaching my brain, and I could feel it preparing to shut down for death. "Oh, don't take this personally, Fed," the man taunted. "Just following orders. I'm sure you understand," he growled as he began to grunt and gurn as he applied the final force of pressure to finish the job. "Don't worry, Ruth. I'm coming," I thought as the lights in the room began to fade. A loud bang, followed by another, rang out through the hospital. The pressure on my throat slackened immensely and a heavy weight slumped on my chest. The light in the room came back and suddenly it felt like I was waking up from a daytime nap, with a raging headache to go with it. I looked down to see the scalp of the hitman, his milky, lifeless eyes staring at the floor. Blood was beginning to pool around both of us, and I looked toward the door to see a young-looking man in black clothing, looking horrified and traumatized, gun still pointed at us, the smoke drifting from the barrel and into the air vent. "Fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck," he rambled. Nurses and doctors rushed into the room, asking the security man to call the police, as they pulled the body off me and started to tend to my wounds. "Oh," I wheezed, causing them all to look at me, baffled. I inhaled some much-needed air and pointed to my phone. "Call the FBI, San Antonio field office. Ask for Assistant Director Ray." I then wheezed. The entire room looked at me, concerned, none of them taking any action. The man's phone began to vibrate and slid its way out of his pocket, making a sharp metallic smack as it fell out onto the floor face up. I looked down at the phone to see the notification on the front screen. The text read, "Is it done?" I turned back to the motionless audience who was still not doing what I'd asked, and I snapped at them. "Do it now!" Chapter 24. 2 days had passed since the second attempt on my life. I wheeled myself down the corridor with Assistant Director Ray walking alongside me. "Has he said anything yet?" I asked. "Not a dicky bird," Ray replied. "Only words he's muttered is that he wants his lawyer and he wants his phone call. However, given the gang's connections to the IRA, I was able to get a judge buddy of mine to enforce the Terrorist Act. He can't tip off anyone in the organization, so he's all yours, James," the AD added, just as we pulled up next to the door of interview room 10, basement floor, FBI HQ, Texas. "You ready?" he asked. I inhaled sharply through my nose and exhaled out the stress before answering. Yes. Okay. Well, I'll be listening. You got this, the AD assured me, before making his way into the next room. I managed to open the door with my freshly bandaged hand and wheeled myself inside. Special Agent Martinez sat across the table, looking tired, annoyed and very frustrated. But when he saw me, he looked baffled for a second before realizing why he was where he was. Well, I must admit, James, you were the last person I expected to see, he opened with. I scoffed and nodded in amusement. Yep, I bet, I said with a chuckle, hiding my anger well. I guess that explains why I was dragged out of bed by an armed SWAT team last night then, he asked matter-of-factly. I nodded once more and began the tape recording. Anthony Martinez, you were under federal arrest on suspicion of 2 counts of conspiracy to murder a federal agent, 3 counts of conspiracy to murder a federal witness, and malfeasance in public office. Due to your suspected involvement with an organized crime gang with links to a terrorist paramilitary operation, your rights to legal representation and a phone call has been restricted until we can assess your case further. Do you understand? Martinez leant forward, squinted his eyes at me, and simply muttered, No comment. I nodded sarcastically and slid over a copy of the picture taken from Ruth's phone. That is you in this photo, taken with an individual known to our inquiry as Pablo, aka Andre Lopez. Who is he to you? No comment. Okay, we'll come back to that. After I expressed suspicions that Sarah Mitchell was Mr. X, you called the radio and instructed HQ to arrest her, yet all the statements from HQ security say that they never heard from you that day. In fact, those at Xavier's cabin stated they saw you and Sarah leave together shortly after. Did you kill her to cover your tracks, assuming I wouldn't live to tell my story? No comment. Last night a man came to my hospital room, masquerading as a nurse, armed with a syringe full of enough opiates to kill a T-Rex 5 times over. That man was shot dead by hospital security after the patient alarm was engaged. The man had in his possession an iPhone 4. Shortly after his death, the man received a text asking if it was done. That text came from an unknown number that came up earlier in our inquiry. The number that coincided with a cluster of suspicious activity on the night of Ian Malek's murder. Now, this number, upon further analysis, matches your known movements. Did you organize the hit on Ian Malek? No comment. Okay, this is a copy of an email from Clive Davis at the CIA. I asked him to get me a last-known sighting of Sarah, during my assumption she was Mr. X. I slid the file over to him. As you can see, this is a photo taken from a traffic cam heading out into the rural backroads of Independence, Missouri. That's you in the driver's seat, and that's Sarah in the passenger seat. I'll ask you once again. Did you kill her? No comment. Independence. That's been the burial site of many OCG loose ends, hasn't it? Didn't take long for the FBI to find the spot. Methane probes tend to speed that process up. Loose Earth, you know the score, being a Fed and everything. Well, ex-Fed. No fucking comment. In that grave we found 2 bodies. They were identified as Sarah Mitchell and none other than Andre Lopez, aka Andre Martinez. That same unknown number made a number of calls and texts in that area. Were you organizing their deaths? This time I wasn't greeted by a no comment. Instead, a single tear poked its way out of Marty's squinted eyes as he seethed at me. In 1983, Andre was born to your mother and father out of wedlock. Your grandparents didn't agree and forced your mother to put Andre up for adoption. He was taken in by Fernando and Maya Lopez. Then your folks get married 5 years later, and you come along. You were the golden child, and Andre was the bastard. How long till he came looking for you? No comment. Why was he in that hole, Marty? Did you kill him? No comment. Did you have him killed, Marty? No comment.
Did you kill your own brother?
No, you fucking did.
Well, his outburst caught me off guard. I shot him a curious look, gesturing for him to elaborate.
You and that fucking bitch, poking your noses in. Do you know how hard I've worked to keep my brother's identity secret? If he was ever outed, then it was only a matter of time before people came looking for me, and the OCG simply couldn't have that. But my brother's been a liability ever since that fucking CCTV. I've had to promise them this investigation would tank, just to stop them killing him. But you and Ruth fucking finding his address, the OCG having to torch his place. All those phones, all those contacts. I couldn't save him. I've never killed anyone. Those were the OCG. Look, I just...
Set it up, I snapped.
He looked away in shame.
You're a fucking weasel. Never any blood on your hands. Other people do your dirty work for you, don't they? Like the guy you sent to the hospital to kill me.
I demanded to know. Martinez seemed to check himself and once again clammed up. Not saying another word till I get some assurances, he said unequivocally.
Who is Mr. X?
I asked, ignoring his earlier statement.
Immunity and witness protection, he replied, arms folded. Are you Mr. X? I pressed, ignoring his demands.
I demand immunity from prosecution and placement in a witness protection program, he simply responded, on his turn to ignore my statements.
Marty, you are hardly in a position to make demands. You're looking at a very lengthy prison stretch. Not a fun place for a Fed, I informed him, and he simply grinned.
No, James. I'm looking at a cunt who knows I'm his best witness. I know fucking everything. The guns, the drugs, the girls. Those seedy pedophiles who spend their dinner breaks abusing young boys before heading back to their jobs as public officials. Yeah, I know every dirty cop and agent in bed with these people, he said, sitting back in a cocky manner. Arms folded, smug grin. I turned to look at the mirror, knowing A.D. Ray was watching from the other side. Moments later, a text came through from him, simply with a thumbs up emoji. I looked up at Martinez, who knew he was getting his way.
Well, gonna need a show of faith from you before we contact the DOJ, I floated.
Go on, Martinez asked.
Marshal, you or anyone else on the task force bent? Did Michaels have any involvement in Malik's hit? I asked.
Well, this here on tape will get Michaels his freedom, today.
No,
he was simply the fall guy. Order came down from above for me to set him up. Well, with him in prison, that just left you. And when you were abducted, that's when I was set to move up, controlling the task force. Like I said, I just follow orders. When Michaels had that outburst over Malik, just made it all the much easier to make people believe it. I couldn't help smiling knowing I'd done right by Jerry. He'd be home with his kids by supper.
So, if you're not Mr. X,
who is? I asked curiously. I don't know. No one does. How else do you think he never gets caught? I don't know if he's OCG, KCPD, FBI, CIA, or fucking YMCA. The guy's a total ghost. Smart as hell, whoever he is, Martinez said with a shrug. I exhaled in frustration and sighed in acceptance. It didn't matter, to be honest. When Martinez gave us the names of the abusers and corrupt officials, the bulk of Mr. X's organization would be gone. He's lost power, influence, and status. He's as good as dead. I turned off the tape and turned to Martinez. Well, I'm going to go get an innocent man out of jail. The DOJ will send someone from the AUSA office to take your statement. Don't leave anything out. I began rolling myself towards the door before Martinez called my name. I turned to him. I'm not a bad guy, James. Not deep down. When I was in his department, Jerry was always good to me. So you want a show of faith? Well, here's one. Get to him quick. Because if you get to Leavenworth even 1 minute after 12, there ain't gonna be no innocent man coming out of that jail unless it's in a bag. You understand? Already came down yesterday. Clean up all loose ends. Well, you were one, Michaels was the other. There's gonna be a changeover in the guards on his wing, but the new guard is gonna be held up. And the old guard is gonna leave his keys, just lying around for the world to find. You understand what I'm telling you? He asked me, eyebrows raised. Well, my eyes widened in horror. Yeah, I suggest you hurry, he told me sternly. I instinctively glanced at my watch. 11:23 a.m. I left the room in a hurry, screamed at Ray to organize a chopper, and off I went. Chapter 25. The chopper tore its way across the state of Oklahoma and into Kansas. As we made our way towards Leavenworth, A.D. Ray sent the recording of Martinez's confession to the DOJ and pulled in every favor he had to get Michaels moved into our custody so we could process him correctly without the risk of him being silenced.
Judge Ryder's dealing with it. Michaels should be out of his cell in a few minutes. Transport's been arranged by the Operation Appletree security. We'll take you guys back to Kansas City International Airport. They have a private plane waiting to bring you and Michaels back to San Antonio. There we can debrief him on the developments of the case and question him further on what he experienced in Leavenworth. He may be able to tell us which guard's on the OCG's payroll. Ray shouted at me as the air crashed into our faces as we traveled at high speeds across the sky. I kept checking my watch. 11:58. I could see Leavenworth. As we circled around the prison and began to land, I could see the transport convoy outside waiting, along with an ambulance that was on standby. But no sign of Michaels, and it was now 11:59. The chopper landed and Ray helped me into my chair. We stood by the transport, waiting for the large shutter door to open and Michaels to be let out. Well, those 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. I checked my watch, and it was now 12:03. Martinez's comment of being even 1 minute late would mean Michaels was dead. Well, around 12:04 the klaxon sounded. The shutter door raised and we all perked up, hoping to see Michaels being let out by the guards. But that wasn't what we saw. Instead, what came out made our hearts drop. 4 guards ducked their heads under the shutter as it continued to rise, as they made their way into the sunlight. It was clear that they were, in fact, escorting something. A gurney. The black bag that it was carrying wasn't empty. I hung my head in shame as I saw the guards load the body bag into the ambulance and it began to drive away, and with it, all the promises I'd made to him. I swore to him that I'd do right by him. I promised I'd get him home to his family. But it was too late. I was too late. Suddenly, however, the klaxon sounded and the shutter door began to rise once more. And once it got halfway, the bright light of the low morning sun flooded into the building. 2 more guards exited the building, and they also had someone with them. Like Jesus rising from the dead, Michael stepped out into the open. He looked exhausted, traumatized, and broken, but by God, he was alive. I couldn't help but smile, and when Michael saw me, he smiled too, and as he came closer, I could see the tears in his eyes. He went to embrace me, and the security stepped in to stop him. For a split second, I forgot that for the next 2 hours, he was still a prisoner. James, am I going home?
He asked slowly, exhausted by weeks of malnourishment from not wanting to eat or drink what people were sliding under his door.
Yes, Jerry. Yes, you are.
You're coming to San Antonio where we can process your release and guarantee your safety. These guys are going to take us to the airport, and if all goes well, you'll be home with your family tonight, I informed him passionately. More tears began to form and run down his cheek as the gravity of what I was telling him sunk in.
Thank you, James. Thank you,
Michael said as the security loaded him into the back of the minibus. Once he was in, the same guards helped me into the back with him, locking my chair in place to avoid me rolling around in there like a loose ball bearing. They closed the doors and 2 security personnel climbed into the front and the other 4 climbed into the second van to escort us, whilst A.D. Ray climbed back in the chopper and set off to meet us back in S.A. The convoy set off and began traveling along the desolate highways. Chapter 26. "How much do you know?" I asked Michaels. His gaunt face, overgrown facial hair, and jagged fingernails told me he'd been living in fear for his entire stay at Leavenworth. He seemed timid, shaken, and a shell of the man he used to be. "Nothing. I just know the warden and 2 of his staff came to get me and said I was being transferred. I honestly thought I was being led somewhere to be finished off. But then I saw you, and I knew that everything was going to be okay," he replied, a shaky smile on his face. "Well, I promised you I'd get you out, didn't I?" said, reassuringly. "I can't thank you enough, James. How did you get me out then?" he asked, curiously. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I showed him the photo of Martinez and Pablo. "Ruth took this photo when we found out the location of Pablo's address. Pablo's name is Andre Lopez. We found his body buried in Independence, Missouri. A comprehensive DNA analysis shows that he's Martinez's brother," I told him somberly. "No fucking way," Michael said, gobsmacked. "After everything I did for that little rat? Was he the one who framed me?" he asked, beginning to become a little irate. I nodded reluctantly. Yeah, he was. The betrayal set in, and Michaels flopped back into his chair. 6 weeks, 6 fucking weeks of my life, living in the same 4 walls, picking razor blades and pieces of shit out of my food, wondering when the door was going to open and a gang of shiv-wielding psychos were going to end me. Oh, that fucking bastard, he muttered, defeated by what I'd told him. Looking at the shackles around his wrists in bafflement about how he'd ended up like a caged animal. And for what? Just so some criminals could keep their seedy profits? I looked up to him, sympathetically. "Guard. Keys," I yelled to the guard in the passenger seat, who turned to look at me, very uncomfortably. "Well, sir, with all due respect, that's against procedure," he responded. "With all due respect, son, this man is my friend, and I'm the ranking officer here," I replied. The guard conceded and unbuckled the key from his belt, throwing it over to me. I unfastened Michael's shackles. He looked so relieved and started to flex the blood back into his hands. Oh, "thank you, James. First bit of freedom I've felt since that backstabbing prick had me locked up." "Yeah, I know. But he came good in the end. Told us about a hit that was planned on our lives. Well, I was targeted in the hospital, and you were going to be shivved in prison when the guards changed over. It's why we rushed to move you." "Oh, jeez." "Yeah, he felt bad about you, though. Said you were always good to him, for what it's worth," I explained. Michaels looked at me, scoffing at the audacity of the comment, before looking a little sheepish. "Say, James, would it be okay if I called my wife? Let her know I'm safe and I'll be home with her and the kids?" he asked, like Oliver asking for more gruel. Well, I smiled. "Yeah, of course." I handed over my phone and allowed him to dial in the number. He held the phone to his ear, awaiting to hear his beloved's voice. A few short seconds passed before suddenly Michael's face lit up. "Oh, honey, yeah, it's me. Listen, yeah, I know, I'm completely fine, honey. I'm out. Yeah, I know, I told you everything will be okay. Look, I'll be home soon, I promise. Yeah, we're heading to Casey International Airport because I need to be processed and debriefed at San Antonio by the Bureau, so no, don't worry. I'm being transported along I-92, just before Hackberry Lane as we speak, so yeah, I'll be at the airport in no more than 10 minutes, out of Missouri, safe and sound. Yeah, I'll call you when I get to Texas. I know, I love you too, baby. Bye." He hung up the phone, locked it, and handed it back to me. "Oh, thank you, James. It was so good to hear her voice. You've no idea how it feels to have a woman stand by you through thick and..." He stopped his lovesick ramble when he saw me wince. I tried to hide my grief from him, I really didn't want him to ask me about it. Oh, shit. James, I didn't even think. He apologized frantically, but I waved off his efforts, giving him my "it's totally fine" smile. Honestly though, oh man, I'm gutted for you. Ruth was quite a woman. Hey, I'm sorry for your loss, pal, he said sincerely. Well, I didn't respond. I couldn't. It was still too painful. Well, Michaels could see this and quickly changed the subject. So, Martinez, he's talking then? He asked. Yeah, seems like he's finally doing the right thing, I replied. What? You mean after trying to have me shipped, and you injected full of carfentanil? I scoffed humorously. Yeah, pretty much. Michaels and I shared a bit of a light-hearted chuckle then. Well, at least with his information, we'll have some leads to track down. All the abusers from Lawrence, all the corrupt officials in the KCPD and public office. Hell, maybe even more moles in the FBI. One of these people has to have an idea of who Mr. X could be, I stated incredulously. Michaels looked a little taken aback. Wait, so he's not Mr. X? No, apparently not. According to him, no one knows. The guy's a ghost. Someone with power, influence. Someone who has power over the FBI, but yet someone hiding in plain sight. Someone who makes sure they are the last person you'd ever suspect, all the while pulling the strings on everything and everyone. Someone who... My sentence trailed off as an impending sense of dread came washing over me. My heart began to pound, and my palms began to pulsate sweat. I took a big gulp and turned to Michaels. Hey, I never told you about Ruth, I said cautiously. Michaels didn't react. He just stared at me. And, how did you know the man at the hospital tried to inject me? I never said, hey, you even knew what drug it was. Looking into his eyes, analyzing his vacant expression, desperately wanting a valid explanation from him. And after a few tense seconds, his blank face slowly morphed into a sinister grin. 'Cause it's the same way I got rid of Officer Knight when he was sticking his nose in too. My eyes widened as the gravity of what he had just said sunk in. He wasn't meant to survive the hanging, but when we heard he was going to make a full recovery, well, I needed to intervene. After all, it worked so well on Jessica Price's father, another nosy cunt who didn't know when to let things lie. Well, I just looked at my friend, who I'd known for the better part of 8 years. During our time on the swarm, we'd spent more time with each other than with our own families. And yet, I didn't recognize the person sat across from me right now. Suddenly I felt another harrowing sense of dread, and asked a question that I really didn't want to know the answer to. Jerry, who did you really just call with my phone? Michaels chuckled before winking at me. My ride. His gaze then flicked towards the front of the vehicle as his now free hands, reaching up, grabbed the support straps hanging from the ceiling. I turned to see what he was looking at. The 2 security guards, blissfully ignorant to our conversation, sat facing forwards. Well, that was until the man in the passenger seat pulled out his gun, aimed it at the driver's head, and pulled the trigger. Blood, bone and brains exploded against the side door window, the bulletproof glass fracturing as the splattered head of the driver seeped into the tiny cracks. He slumped to the side, and the van swerved violently off the road, through the field fence, and then tipped on its side. Chapter 27. My daze cleared moments later. Everywhere hurt. My head, my arms, my legs. The security guard also came round and began climbing into the back with us. He helped Michaels to his feet, where Michaels coughed the dust from his lungs and pointed to the deceased driver. It's gone. Get me his gun. We'll need it. Second car will be here soon, he commanded. The security guard obeyed and pulled the Glock from the driver's holster before handing it to Michaels. Right, hurry up and shoot him. Ryde'll be here soon. Mr. X has a plane waiting for you at a private airfield not far from here. He wants you to get out of here ASAP, the guard said, turning away from Michaels to get the side door open, which was now essentially a roof hatch. I had a good view from my back, laying helpless on the floor, to see Michaels raise the gun, aim at the security guard's head, and blow him away. Once he'd crouched to collect the man's gun and his phone, he stood back up, tucked the gun into his waistband, and turned to look at me. I know you're a lot smarter than him, James, so I know it's probably dawned on you by now that Mr. X isn't Martinez. It isn't Marshall. It isn't Sarah. Hell, it's not even some dark, mysterious criminal figure. No, James. It's me. His gloat as he revealed this was borderline psychopathic. The pride in which he'd taken to fooling everyone was too much for him to keep to himself. You won't get away with this. Escort car. They'll have seen we crashed. They'll be here in any second. Just as my sentence ended, the sound of tires screeching on hot, dry tarmac outside could be heard. Car doors opening and slamming shut, guns cocking, footsteps approaching. I heard their voices calling out, asking if we were okay, and I smiled at Michaels cockily. See, you're outgunned. Michaels looked at the dead security guard's phone. He smiled at something on the screen, before turning back to look at me. His smile was much cockier than mine. He'd read something that made him very confident and self-assured of his situation. Me? Oh yes, he agreed, before winking at me and adding, but guess what? So are they. The sound of gunfire rang out through the countryside. Screams of men being ripped apart like cattle in an abattoir, desperately breathing as they frantically looked for where the danger was coming from. More gunfire, more screams, before simply silence. A few tense seconds passed and the door, now the roof of the van, was ripped to the sides. A large-built man in dark clothing and a ski mask held his hand down into the vehicle. Michael smiled at the man, putting the phone in his pocket, holding his gun in between his teeth whilst grabbing the man's hand eagerly as he began to climb out. Well, I thought to myself, any minute now, they will kill me. I desperately tried to find a weapon on the dead security guard, who was lying mere inches from me. I needed to act fast. There was only going to be a few seconds while I had no eyes on me. Michael's legs disappeared from sight, and I heard him land on the ground outside. I grabbed the first thing I could see of any use to me, the man's radio. As I struggled with my fragile hands to undo the buckle on his utility belt, I heard the back doors of the van begin to rattle as the men outside were attempting to prise it open. Just as the door lock snapped from the pressure, the buckle came off. I pulled the device from its holster and slid it behind my back in my chair, just as the door ripped open and the sunlight flooded in. My eyes squinted as they tried to focus on what was there, and when they did, I could see 8 men, all of them looking at me. One was Michael's, the rest were all different shapes and sizes, but they were all dressed in that familiar black attire with their faces hugged by balaclavas. One of them cocked his automatic rifle and aimed it at me as I lay there helpless. Michaels, however, placed his hand over the barrel and told the man, "No, he's coming with us." The men climbed into the van, unbuckled my chair from the side of the van and pulled me out onto the roadside. As much as it hurt, I tensed myself into the chair as rigid as I could, to ensure that the radio stayed with me, and more importantly, that no one saw it. They wheeled me towards a large transit van, parked behind some large trees on the side of the road, opposite to where they pulled me from. I was pushed through where 5 brave agents had just brutally lost their lives. Bodies were laid, mangled like Swiss cheese, on the ground. Some even propped up against their vehicle. A sea of blood and bullets shimmered in the hot afternoon sun. I was picked up off the ground by the 4 biggest heavies and lowered into the back of the van. Michaels climbed in with me, along with 2 of the masked men. 2 others jumped in the front. The rest made their way over to a black SUV parked a little further up the road, where it dipped. Unless you were in the field next to it, you wouldn't even know it was there. The doors then slammed shut and the vehicle sped off, turning left at the junction. I was desperately trying to shift my weight in my chair to try and sit on the button, meaning HQ, the FBI, anyone who could help me could listen in. I was beginning to get some funny looks, but I just tried to play it off as discomfort from the pain. Michaels turned to the man next to him with a serious look on his face. "Hey, Martinez is talking. He needs to be silenced immediately. When I'm in Ireland, I'll make some arrangements. I'll have the IRA blow San Antonio off the map if I have to, and this has to happen quick. I'm going to need the boys to handle everything over here while everything's in place. Can I count on you?" The man simply said, "Have we let you down yet?" Michaels then grinned in satisfaction. I was too busy listening to their conversation that I wasn't concentrating on the control of my body, and I made a fatal error. I dropped my weight too quickly on the button, and it slid out from under me. The radio static crackled, and everyone in the van turned to look at me. Michaels looked at the man next to him and nodded. He stood up, grabbed me by the collar, and ripped me forward with an obscene amount of force. He fetched the radio and slammed me back into my seat hard. He dropped the radio on the floor and proceeded to stomp on the device until it was nothing but screws, plastic shards, and microchips. As I looked at my only hope of rescue being destroyed, Michael simply watched me. He shook his head slowly and began to tut. "Oh, come on. Why don't you just kill me? Get it over with. Come on," I snapped at him. Michael scoffed. "James, I don't want to kill you. I need you. It's only a matter of time before the Bureau realized that we weren't on any plane they organized, and therefore they're going to come looking for us. Now, when I do catch my real plane, I'm going to need some insurance, just in case the United States government decide to shoot my plane down before I get over international waters. Now, a corrupt agent with ties to organized crime and terrorism, they'll shoot us down without a second thought. But a decorated Fed hero like you, James? Oh, no. No, sir." "Well, you've really thought of everything, haven't you?" Michael scoffed. "When you're the clandestine leader of a large criminal organization, then you need to think these things through." God, his arrogance sickened me. "Yeah, you're not a federal agent anymore. You're Mo. Martinez, he's done. You've got no influence anymore. How long before these guys decide you're just not worth it anymore?" I asked him, trying to get into his head, trying to cast doubts. But it was useless. Michaels was cold. He'd ordered deaths, organized abuse, blackmailed the rich and powerful, and he'd profited from pain and misery. There was no rattling the real Jerry Michaels. "Well, I won't lie. Being the commander of the organized crime department definitely made it much easier for me to get things going. Getting rid of the competition, diverting investigations away from powerful allies. Wasn't long before people turned to me for the big decisions," he explained with a shrug. "Why though, Jerry? We've known each other for a long time. You're one of the best agents I've ever worked with. When did you turn into the same people that we worked 100-hour weeks, away from our families and friends, to catch?" I pleaded. Again, he simply shrugged. "You just answered your own question, James," he replied in a belittling manner. I screwed my face up in confusion, but he leant in to explain. "My wife, she shacked up with her yoga instructor after fucking him while I was busting my hump at work, risking my life paying the bills. My kids don't even call me dad anymore. When they were young, my wife had to show them pictures of me, just so they remembered what I looked like." I didn't excuse what he did, but I couldn't help but empathize. He continued. "I lost everything. Gave my life to put criminals behind bars. For what? $75K a year and a pension? It used to make me sick on drug busts, seizing stacks of thousands to just hand it over to the government. Why? So they can fund campaigns run by pedophiles? Construct buildings to clean dirty money? No, not anymore. When we took down the swarm, I went through the files that Gibson kept in his private home, evidence that never came to light. I was thinking he was saving it in case he ever wormed his way out of jail, and he could start back up. I could have handed it over, but I didn't. Something in me told me I should just keep it, because I knew I could use it for myself and, well, finally get what I was owed. There was dirt on senators, judges, politicians, even other law enforcement. Right there I had a network. I just had to remind them, because Gibson was gone, well, they were still under the thumb to someone. When I found out that there was a turf war going on in KC, I saw an opportunity. A new ambitious criminal outfit were trying to muscle out the old guard. The KC mob had their own way of doing things. They'd never follow, but, well, these guys, hungry, young, ruthless. Once they saw the power that I had, they all fell in line. I rid the streets of the KC Mafia, and we moved right in. Kansas City has always had a notorious reputation with corrupt police officials. It was only a matter of time before I got something on them. Started running horse and rent boys. Once they gave in to their temptations, you own them. He stated this all passionately, as if reading a chapter from a self-help book for criminal masterminds. So, was your plan to get framed for Malik's murder all along? I asked, genuinely curious. Of course. Come on, James. You don't think I didn't know about Malik's offshore account? There isn't anything I don't know. I knew Malik was a fat, greedy prick. One threat to himself or his wallet, and he was going to sing like a canary. It was only a matter of time, so I needed to use this to my advantage. That's where Marshall came in. Having me framed and locked up would completely divert any suspicion. Marshall was my eventual ticket to freedom, once the operation was dead. And then the final piece of the puzzle, Xavier. One of the first cops I ever got in my pocket. Oh, believe me, don't shed any tears over that guy. He's done some very questionable things over the years when it comes to young boys. The Mr. X pseudonym, whilst very mysterious, was also intentional, as when the time came to offer up a patsy, it would automatically fit that narrative, and then, when the operation was over and the prime suspect was dead, it could be declared as suicide. I'd be released. Martinez would be promoted in the FBI, and we would go on with business as usual. Well, of course, though, Andre being discovered and Martinez being arrested complicated things. This right here, this is Plan B. So, where did Martinez come in all of this? Was he as corrupt and greedy as you? Or did you find something on him too? I asked curiously. Well, Michaels chuckled. Andre, he was already a high-ranking member of this budding organization long before I came along. Young, driven, charismatic, a born leader. The boy worked for the Quintero cartel down in Laredo as a main figure in their trafficking operations. When the swarm was shut down, Quintero went underground. Andre came looking for work here in America. Spoke highly of his brother, who was a federal agent. As soon as I dug up who he was, I offered Martinez a position in my unit at the Bureau. I groomed him into his role: cybercrime, anti-corruption, and organized crime. We devised a plan so that Martinez would bury some evidence to save his brother from federal prosecution. Once that happened, I contacted Martinez to let him know that, well, unless he wanted to spend 4 years in a cell with dangerous people that he'd put away, then he worked for us now. It's really funny. He worked for me in the criminal world, and he worked for me in the real world. He never even knew it. But I think as time went on, well, he liked the power, the money, the feeling of omnipotence that comes with this life, he said with pure satisfaction. And the, attack on you in prison, was that real? I asked, my curiosity growing. Of course, it was necessary. Much easier to run things and have items brought in for you when you have a private cell, like the one you pushed for me to have. Oh, I never did thank you for that, by the way, he said with a belittling pat on my shoulder. Young girls were groomed, raped, murdered. Young boys were abused and molested. Families torn apart by drugs and grief. And you watched from your cell whilst I was beaten half to death by your men. How did none of it bother you? I pleaded, hoping something of the man I once knew still remained. God, James, don't take the beating personally. It's just business. I needed to know who the rat in my organization was, that's all. And hey, it's a good job you found out yourself, isn't it? Because if Ruth hadn't told Sarah, she wouldn't have told Martinez, and he wouldn't have arranged that little incident in the kitchen. If you hadn't done that, I don't think it would have been long before he reported something detrimental towards me from Leavenworth. So, once again, man, thank you. God, his smarminess made my blood boil. However, his smile dropped when he began to address the other statements that I'd made to him. And don't talk shit to me about all that other crap. Because trust me, I know from experience you don't need drugs or grief to tear a family apart. No, a blood-sucking government who don't give a damn about you. That's what rips people apart. And you of all people know that rape, murder, and abuse happens every day regardless. So why not make some money from it? Do you know how many people I've killed before today, James? None. Do you know how many girls I've raped ever? None. Never touched a kid in my life either. These people make these choices. Them, not me. If I didn't do what I did, do you think that would stop them? No. All I'm doing is making sure I get what I deserve. I just want what I deserve. His deliberate tone and dead eyes made my blood run cold, as his gaze bored holes into me. Time seemed to stand still until finally the van turned sharp to the left and Michaels looked through the front of the van and grunted with a grin. Hey, we're here. Chapter 28. The van pulled onto the dirt runway and began to make its way towards a small cargo plane that was sat stationary in position, ready to fly. The van pulled up alongside the plane, and the two men in the front cocked their weapons and jumped out of the van. They scouted the area and gave the all-clear for Michaels to exit the vehicle. He jumped out and breathed in the air sarcastically. He'd played the framed man, locked up in solitary confinement for weeks on end, and now he was moments away from freedom. I was hoisted out of the van by 4 of the unknown men, once again, and dropped unceremoniously onto the ground. The impact jolted the hairline cracks in my fragile bones, and I winced in pain. Michael saw this. He looked at one of the men and pointed to the plane. Go open the cargo door. Much smoother for our guest. The men obliged and began boarding the plane. So, what's going to happen to me, Jerry, when you no longer need your insurance policy? I asked, deep down already knowing the answer. Michaels put on a serious expression with a hint of superficial regret. James, we've known each other a long time. I respect you no matter what has happened. Know that, I respect you. I really want you to know that, which is why I won't lie to you. You'll be dead once we get over international waters. His bluntness and honesty hit me in the face like a bat. His words seemed to linger in the air for a few seconds before he added, Don't worry though. I'll make sure it's quick and dignified. You deserve that much. 24 hours ago, I welcomed death. A chance to see Ruth again. But after today, finding the man who'd ordered her death, I wanted to live. I wanted to get justice for her. But hearing Michaels tell me in a frank manner that in a matter of hours my corpse would be thrown from a plane into the Atlantic Ocean, honestly, it was hard to process. Michaels whistled at the remaining henchman, silently ordering him to push me towards the plane. I was catatonic. I didn't even struggle. I was desperately trying to dig down deep, down into that place that allowed me to drive a car with 4 busted limbs. The adrenaline, the rush, the desire to survive and get the job done, but I just couldn't find it. So instead, I just sat there and was wheeled towards my last ride. The plane's propellers began to slowly wind up as the other henchmen trotted ominously down the cargo ramp, guns in hand, waiting to escort us onto the plane. Michaels and the remaining masked man were brainstorming the plan to kill Martinez, talking about a potential bomb being smuggled into the building by someone dressed as a cleaner, using phrases like necessary evil and collateral damage. I was the only one sat still, the only one silent, the only one that heard it, faintly. Very faintly, but getting louder with every passing second. Sirens. Just as the men were about to force me up the ramp and onto the plane, they suddenly stopped. Michaels and his friends were now looking towards the end of the runway, where around 6 black FBI SUVs, along with 5 KCPD patrol cars and 2 SWAT vans, were all kicking up dust and dirt as they came tearing onto the airstrip and were hurtling toward us. The men began to open fire at the cavalry, sparks igniting as the herd of bullets ricocheted off the chassis of the vehicles. The cars all began to disperse off into different directions to essentially block the runway and get a tactical position on the gang. Once stationary, the doors of the vehicles all flew open, and various armed law enforcement agents all jumped out and took cover behind their makeshift barricades. The bullets continued to fire, and in return, they fired back. I saw men go down on both sides, but the OCG were heavily outmanned and outgunned. They fell quicker and harder. Puffs of blood and cotton popped all around me as rounds tore through the armed gang, until there was just one left. While Michaels, his right-hand man, went down on his shield, I felt a force grab me by the scruff of the neck and yank me out of the chair. The pain was nulled by the adrenaline of the situation, but it hurt nevertheless, as my casted legs were forced to support themselves, as Michaels held me up in a loose, rear-naked choke. The final bullet blasted through the man's balaclava, and then shortly after his skull, before he dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Michaels held his gun to my temple and began screaming at the cops. "Don't fucking shoot. Don't come any closer, or I swear to God, I'll blow James Rodriguez's fucking brains out. Now get fucking back." His outburst caused all the men to lower their weapons, and moments later, A.D. Ray stepped into sight and began speaking through a megaphone. Jerry, it's Andrew. Come on, son. This doesn't have to end in any more bloodshed than it already has. Just put the gun down." Ray sent the comm request flying across the runway, and when it reached Michael's ears, he tightened his grip on my neck and pressed the barrel of the gun into my temple. "Don't try your textbook hostage negotiations with me, Ray. If I go down, I'll take your fucking golden boy down with me, I swear to God," he yelled over, particles from the froth of his mouth spraying onto my ear and cheek. "Hey, you're not getting out of this, Jerry. Face it," I gasped to him, as the air to my lungs was becoming more and more restricted. "Oh, shut up," he snapped, turning his head to look at me and slamming the barrel into my temple. This caused the sound of around 10 to 15 guns to cock and aim at him. Michaels took the gun from my temple and pointed it right back at them. He began frantically pointing the gun at each rifle aimed at him. "Keep waving that thing around and one of them's gonna pull the trigger. And then this is all over," I taunted him further. He yanked my weight up further then, making it so the only part of him visible was the right side of his face. I could see Ray waving the men off, ordering them to lower their weapons, and they complied. "See, now, we're going to move slowly, very slowly towards the plane," Michaels ordered, and he then began to drag me towards the aircraft. I could see Ray's face, looking worried, knowing that procedure would prevent him from stopping Michaels. Law Enforcement 101, prevent loss of life. Yeah, unless he fired at them, there wasn't much they could do at this point. If I had the full use of my lungs, I would have yelled at them to just end us both. I mean, he needed to be stopped. If he got away, Martinez would be killed and hundreds potentially killed in the process. We needed Martinez to talk in order to make Ruth's death meaningful. And there it was, right there, the motivation I was looking for. If Michaels got away, then Ruth died for nothing. I'm not saying I'm some sort of superhero or anything, but you hear those stories about soccer mums lifting cars off their children. Well, it was like that. No pain, no barriers. Nothing would stop you from fighting for the ones you love. We were a few yards from being on the plane now, and out of the line of fire. I didn't have long. He'd shifted his position so that my left arm was trapped in a chicken wing, whilst his right arm was wrapped around my neck with the gun in hand. I was struggling to move my legs as quickly as he wanted, and this caused him to yank me towards him. My back collided with his abdomen, and as my back grazed against him, I felt my way out. With my one free hand, as Michaels was keeping his eyes on the cops, I reached around and braced myself. Not just for the pain and grit this would take, but the timing and precision of it. I had one go at this. "Don't worry, James. We'll be out of here soon. And that finishing you quick out of respect, well, you can forget it. I'll make sure the last thing you ever regret was calling the feds," he whispered into my ear before yelling over to the cops. "Clear the fucking runway or I'll blow him away." I could see Ray reluctantly order everyone to get back into their vehicles. Much to everyone's rage, they eventually complied, though. Michael's tense stare turned to a sadistic grin when he finally saw a gap open up on the runway, big enough for his plane to fit through. "Come on then, James. Let's be having here, as the Brits say." He said this with a facetious chuckle. We were out of sight now. There'd be no one to help me other than myself at this point. The only way this plane was stopping was if I made sure no one flies it. "You know, Jez, maybe you should stop mocking international cultures and focus on your surroundings," I taunted. "I've checked my surroundings. This is the perfect location. It's all being thought out," he snapped back. "Really? So you've seen the sniper in the northwest corner, whose line of fire you've just walked into?" I asked, trying to sound as assured as possible. Michaels, under all the pressure, didn't even entertain the chance I was lying, and even if he did, he needed to check anyway. As he swung us anti-clockwise, I took my chance and grabbed the Glock that was tucked away in his waistband without him noticing. He held me close like a shield, aiming his gun into the distant trees, looking for any glint of light bouncing off the scope. I grit my teeth, slowly brought the gun across my chest, and as soon as the barrel touched flesh, I pulled the trigger. A loud bang ripped the tense silence, accompanied by a sharp cry of pain from Jerry Michaels, who collapsed to the ground, me with him. I hit the dirt hard, my limbs screaming out in agony as they tried to support my weight as I rolled onto my front to see Michaels. He was still alive, but he was clutching his neck desperately as blood began to squirt from between his fingers and bubble up through his mouth. I looked at my mutilated shoulder from where the bullet had blown a hole right through and up into Michael's neck. I assumed from the fact that there was a clear exit wound that I hadn't hit any bones, but nevertheless it was bleeding badly. If I didn't get to a hospital soon, I could die. And if that be the case, so be it. This man could cause no more suffering. Martinez would live and tell his tale, and therefore Ruth's death had meaning, and who knows, maybe I'd get to see her again. I crawled over to Michael's as the cavalry was fast approaching, likely from hearing the gunshots. When I reached him, he was nearly gone. His lungs were full of blood. He was choking and thrashing around. I looked him right in the eye when I told him, "You said this was all about getting what you deserve. Well, you fucking son of a bitch. You just got it." I then passed out from the pain and blood loss a few seconds later, slowly fading to the sound of Ray screaming, demanding to know where the ambulance was. "We did it, Ruthie. We got him," I muttered to myself as it started to go black. "Oh fuck, come on. We're losing him. Where's that fucking ambulance?" Ray screamed. The sound of a siren in the distance could be heard over the top of all the commotion and verbal back and forth, but before it could get there, it all went dark. "I'll see you soon, Ruth. I'm a-comin'." Epilogue. I walked down the hall of Quantico and into the waiting room. Jenny, Ray's PA, was at her desk, head deep in a stack of paperwork. I walked up to the desk and cleared my throat to get her attention. She looked up and was startled by my presence. "Oh my God, James! How are you? Oh, it's so good to see you up and about," she exclaimed. I smiled at her. Well, Jenny could be a little OTT at times, but I liked her, and it was good to see a familiar face. Good to see you too, Jan. Hey, I'm here to see Ray. Is he in?" I inquired. She looked puzzled and began looking at her diary. Oh, I don't see an appointment. Yeah, you won't. He doesn't know I'm here, I replied. She scoffed and shook her head, waving off my reply. Oh, say nothing of it, James. He'll be thrilled to see you, she asserted, and called the buzzer. Oh, Mr. Ray, I've got James Rodriguez here to see you, she said, before a brief silence. James? He's here? Oh, don't have him standing there, Jen. Send him in. Oh, and cancel my 11 a.m., Ray exclaimed through the speaker. Jen chuckled and gave me a smile. I told you. Now go on, James, go through. And once again, it's really good to have you back, Jen added. Yeah, good to be back, Jen, I replied, and then headed through to Ray's office. I tapped on the door, and Ray shouted for me to enter. When I walked in, he was already standing. I held out my hand for him to shake, but he waved it off and pulled me in for an embrace. Ah, it's good to see you, James, son, he said, as he let me go and gestured for me to sit down. Ah, what's it been? 6 weeks? He asked. 8. It's been 8 weeks, I corrected. Wow, no one's heard from you at all since the hospital discharged you. I've left calls and texts, but I got nothing back. Hey, I've been worried, Ray said with concern. Yeah, I've been, just healing, I guess, keeping busy. Not really been out much, I informed him. Healing physically or mentally? He asked sheepishly. A little bit of both, I guess. Like I said, just kept myself busy with a few projects. Yeah, I was surprised not to see you at Miss Maddox's funeral. I didn't answer him. I just cleared my throat and stayed quiet. My bones and wounds may have healed, but Ruth wasn't something I could deal with at the moment. Ray shook his head in concerned sympathy. Ah, James, come on, son. You need to talk about it. It's not healthy. I did what I always did, and I ran away from it. I quickly changed the subject. So, what's happening with the Appletree case? Ray scoffed and shook his head with acceptance at my unwillingness to open up, and decided he wasn't going to flog a dead horse. Instead, he opened his top drawer and pulled out a blue file with a red confidential sticker on the front. He handed it over to me. Well, here, see for yourself. I opened up the file and began reading. Oh, Andrew, I never thanked you for saving my life, I stated sincerely. Ray chuckled to himself. Well, not me you should be thanking, son. It was Martinez. His revelation stunned me, and I looked up at him in amazement. Pardon? Yeah, well, unintentionally anyway, he said, throwing the comment away. But the cock of my head gestured for him to elaborate. Oh, Martinez might not have known Michaels was Mr. X, but he was the gatekeeper. He knew every dirty cop, politician, judge, and federal agent in the pocket of the OCG. Well, in order to seal his witness protection and immunity, he provided us with a list of every corrupt official that he was aware of. Page 10 in the folder. Of course, a lot of them shocked us, some not so much, but there were 2 that were of note. One of which was Officer Daniel Spencer. He was one of the security personnel assigned to Operation Appletree. So that's how they got the tracker on my car without anyone seeing. And that's who used Michael's ID card at HQ the night of the ambush, I exclaimed after the pieces fell into place. Yeah, and obviously we saw he was on the manifesto for the Michaels prison transport. So when we got a report from the escort vehicle that the transport had crashed off the road, we came straight away. Obviously wasn't long before we found the ambush site. I can't lie, we were all really confused when we found Spencer's body. Michael shot him right in front of me. Clearly didn't want any loose ends, I speculated. Jeez, what a bastard. What happened to the man we knew, James, eh? Ray pleaded. Well, don't know, sir. I just don't know. So, what happened after you found Spencer's body? I continued. Well, as soon as we found Spencer was corrupt, we began tracking his phone. We followed it to an airfield, and the phone was found on Michael's body after he was pronounced dead at the scene. Really? Spencer didn't use a burner? I asked, a little taken aback. Well, he likely did during the operation, hence why there's no suspicious activity on his phone prior to the ambush, but, well, who knows? Maybe he was under the impression he was going on the plane with Michael, so it didn't matter anyway, Ray ventured. Either way, it was that decision that saved your life. Oh, Michael's pocketed the phone as soon as he'd shot him, I added. Well, it wasn't a flash model. I've seen newer phones used as burners anyway. Likely assumed it was a burner with numbers in the history and didn't want it being found by us. Well, little did he know, it'd be the thing that led us right to him. Oh, smartest criminal I've ever met, Andrew. Honestly, he played me like a fiddle this whole operation. He played the angry, pedo-hating dad in that interview room, so he had motive. Had himself framed with convenient evidence, with a plan to exonerate himself at a later date, whilst derailing the operation at the same time. Yeah, he played the beaten victim in prison to get me to push for him to have a private cell, so he could conduct his criminal business from Leavenworth. All the contacts he had, he could have organized a penthouse on the roof of the prison, but he needed me to do it so we wouldn't get suspicious. Yeah, he put the word out that there was an attempt on his own life, made us fast-track his release. He knew about Ruth, Andrew. He knew about the attempt on my life, too, at the hospital. Every setback, every hiccup, it spun it in his favor, but he was brought down by one small mistake. Well, some things have come to light during our investigation, such as the prison. Yeah, we searched Michael's VP cell, found burners, a laptop, and multiple dongles. We also found a balaclava. Analysis of those devices yielded messages that were sent to the phones we found in Marshall's apartment. Martinez was already confessed those were his burners that he tasked someone from the OCG to plant while you were all at HQ, the day of your kidnapping. This brings us to the second person of interest on the list. Correctional Officer Neil O'Reilly. Works in Leavenworth. Well, he worked in Leavenworth, Ray said, correcting the tense of his words. Oh, so, he's been charged then? I questioned. Nope. He's dead, Ray revealed, and my eyebrows raised. Another loose end, I ventured. Oh, very loose. We went through his finances. Forensics estimate he was in receipt of upwards of over $125K a month, more than double what the other officials on the list were in receipt of. They seem to be getting payments every 3 months too. Yeah, this guy was important. I mulled over the information, then came to the realization. Oh, he knew that Michaels was Mr. X, didn't he? That's who smuggled in phones, laptops, and dongles for him. He was paid for his services and his silence, I concluded. Well, either way, he was found face down in one of the corridors. Someone had taken a claw hammer to the back of his head during the guard changeover. We found a text on one of the burners in Michael's cell that read, "Change of plan. Take out CO on VP duty. Q&Q. X." Quick and quiet, I surmised. Yeah, that's what we assumed too, Ray agreed. But yeah, that was who was in the body bag, being wheeled out of Leavenworth when we arrived. The text was sent an hour before we got there. Just enough time for the hit to take place and Michaels to be escorted out. Further examination of the devices showed there were also texts, dated around the time of Xavier's death, to the number that Martinez was using, instructing him to order a hit on Michaels. No instruction to take you out, though, he added. Yeah, well, he didn't need a push. Me finding out that Pablo was Martinez's brother essentially got him killed. I know he was pretty upset about that. He told me himself. At the hospital I told him that I wasn't going to give up the investigation either. Would have only been a matter of time till I found the connection between them. Oh, I don't doubt it was preferable to see me gone, I speculated. Well, he's admitted to everything. He admitted that he got close to Sarah so he could gain access to her computer and emails, which he then used to delete autopsy reports, request wiretaps for those officers, who he then ordered to incriminate Xavier. Once they'd done what he wanted, he arranged their murders. He said that this would make her an automatic suspect if an investigation ever came round, knowing she had access to the documents, financial records, and she was an expert in cyber communications. He confessed, however, that his feelings for Sarah became genuine at a point. The nerve, huh? But he did explain that everything he did was under the instruction of Michael's. How can you sanction a murder for someone you genuinely cared about? I'll never understand the criminal mind. Tell me, though, how did he react when he found out Mr. X was Michael's all along? I asked, intrigued. Well, understandably shocked. He felt duped as much as anybody, but ultimately, he's glad he didn't know for his own sake. He said he was recruited due to his experience in cybercrime. Helped set up the encrypted chat rooms where Michaels conducted his activities. His time in internal affairs gave him the inside scoop on which agents were dirty. He'd buried cases on several agents under investigation in return for favors down the line. Before long, he had a network of corrupt agents. Well, so he's proven to be a valuable asset then. Well, quite frankly, he's a goldmine. He's given us everything we need to know to sanction a RICO warrant on the OCG. He's told us about the drugs. They're imported by a unit the OCG have in El Paso. The Quintero cartel smuggle them over in return for money and sometimes girls that the OCG need to disappear. So he's spoken about the grooming parties, I probed. Oh, he has. Pablo, a.k.a. Andre Martinez, escaped prosecution when the Manuel cartel was RICO'd back in 2006. He moved to Kansas City to meet up with his estranged brother back when Martinez lived in KC in late 2007. He joined the OCG in 2008, made his way up the ranks, using his contacts with the splinter faction of the Quintero cartel, organized drug running and human trafficking links. Martinez trained to be an FBI agent in 2010 and qualified in 2012. Once his brother relayed this information to the leader of the OCG, that was Michaels, in late 2012, Martinez was asked by his brother to delete his information from the RICO investigation files into the Manuel cartel members still at large. Michaels had a camera set up in the room where Martinez would commit the acts. I used this initially to blackmail him, but as the years went on, Martinez admitted he loved how his career was skyrocketing. He loved the power, the money, and all the rest. And his brother took up a role as a lure for the grooming parties. The VIPs who were involved in the parties would essentially place orders, specifically on age, height, body type, hair color, so on. Pablo would identify girls who met these specifics. He'd exploit any vulnerabilities they had, such as disgruntled home life, substance abuse, promiscuity, things like that. Well, he'd date them, wow them, wine and dine them, made them infatuated with him and his lavish lifestyle. Once they trusted him and the time was right, he'd take them to one of his parties. Slowly but surely he'd get them drunk and drugged up. At this point they depended on him, too. They no longer had their families around. No money, no friends. He controlled them. So when he floated the idea that they'd sleep with the VIPs, there wasn't much resistance. And if there was, he'd threaten them. So, what happened to the girls afterwards? I asked, not really wanting to know the answer to the question. The VIPs didn't want to risk the girls IDing them. Michaels didn't want to risk Pablo being identified and the link to Martinez being discovered. So most of them were shipped out of the country using Quintero when they'd run out of their use. And if Quintero couldn't get them out quick enough, well, they'd get rid of them in other ways. Some were made to look like suicides. Some looked like overdoses. Some were made to look like the victims of other criminals. Well, they always found a way, Ray informed me. Well, at least we know that many lives have been saved due to this operation, despite the number we lost, I pointed out. And Ray nodded, somberly in agreement. So, what did Martinez get in return for his information? I quizzed. It's hard not to give him immunity, to be honest. This is a massive day for law enforcement. One of the most prolific federal deals that a criminal has ever made. In return for his wealth of information, he's been given a new identity now, living in an undisclosed location. The video depositions, written statements, submitted devices, and evidence consulting is more than enough to shut down Lawrence Boyer's home and prosecute all the bastards who Michaels and Malik worked into that place. Not to mention, we've already made 21 arrests of the VIPs from the Blue Hills Country Club. All of them members of the local government, law enforcement, judges, hedge fund owners, local celebrities. Well, 18 of the 21 were partaking in the abuse at Lawrence as well as the grooming parties. He also admitted to exposing Special Agent Scott Hamer's true identity. When Ruth confided in Sarah, due to their external relationship, she confided in him. He obviously passed that on to Michaels, and arrangements were made. Well, at least now the public will know the sacrifices he made to make sure the streets and public offices have been cleaned up, I stated. Well, Ray looked uncomfortable now. He knew how righteousness was, and this wasn't going to go down well. The governor of Missouri and the Kansas City Police Commissioner have begged the DOJ to keep the trials and records sealed to protect public faith. They weren't going to do it, but they've called in every favor, and now the DOJ, well, they've accepted. The findings of Operation Appletree will never hit the public eye. Hey, I'm sorry. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, he said sheepishly. Well, I just shook my head in disgust. Oh, fucking cover-up. Hasn't the city had enough of them? What about Scott's family? He was a hero and he'll never be honored. I began to rant. Ray pursed his lips and nodded his head in agreement. Well, I did fight it, I swear, but given the ringleader and a mole on the task force was FBI, the director felt it was beneficial to both agencies to keep it sealed. But, cover-up or not, I assure you Hamer's family will be taken care of, and he will be a hero in the walls of Quantico. But anyway, here, he said, holding the file out in front of him. Every arrest record resulting from Appletree is in that file, James. It can't leave this office, and obviously you signed a non-disclosure agreement when you joined the FBI. But if you want to take a look, you can. You've earned it, Ray said with a wink. Thank you, sir. I will, I said, with a smile and a nod of gratitude. He handed over the file and I opened it up. I checked the list of names. I was furious to see the Kansas City's police chief, along with, not surprisingly, several captains, including Mike Xavier and multiple detectives and officers like Ryan and Patrick. They were all there in black and white. Dates, places, times, money, all the abuse, violence, drugs, and grooming they helped commit and cover up. It was on a scale no one could have imagined. At least Kansas City was a lot cleaner now that Appletree was finished, whether people knew it or not. I handed the file back over and thanked Ray. I turned away from him to begin to stand up with the help of my stick. James? Yes, sir. I turned back to Ray to address him. I want you to come back to work. I think you're ready. When you were last in this office, I was worried about you and your drinking, and as a result, I had to send you on administrative leave. But you seem more like yourself now, and there's a position heading up a task force, starting in a month. I think you'd be perfect for it. Your experience and expertise in the area will be a true asset, But I cut him off immediately with my eagerness. This was just what I needed. I'd love to, sir, honestly. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I've been doing quite a bit of my own research into it. I've got some great ideas of where to begin, so I really think we can get him. I began to ramble. Well, I'm honestly glad you're on the same page, James. Omar Quintero is potentially one of the most dangerous men in the human trafficking game, and this surveillance up. I shook my head in bemusement and frustration. Omar Quintero? Oh, I was talking about Robert Cassidy, I snapped. Ray rolled his eyes and groaned in an exaggerated manner. James, we've been over this. The Cassidy case is over. He's RCMP's problem now. Yeah, but you were saying my experience and knowledge on the case will be an asset, I countered. Yeah, I meant with the swarm. Organized crime, human trafficking, that sort of thing. Now, with Michaels and Martinez gone, you're the only senior agent with any organized crime experience. James, come on. You always knew this was the plan for you when you came back. You served all you can in the BSU. Time to move and focus on the criminals who are polluting our borders with drugs and violence. Not some runaway psychopath who's living off the grid in Canada. Look, you're worrying me, James. It's like you're obsessed and can't let go of him. Look, James, quite frankly, it's not healthy. If you can't let Cassidy go, well, I feel we may have to let you go, Ray said reluctantly. Well, I hung my head, swallowed my pride, and bit my tongue. No, honestly, sir, it's fine. I'll be thrilled to head up the task force. You know my feelings on Cassidy. He's a dangerous guy, and I just don't like the thought of him out there, potentially able to hurt another person. But you're right. There are other people at risk. One's in America, and they need our help, I said diplomatically, holding my seething disappointment behind my forced smile. Well, that's great to hear, Ray replied. Going back to work for the opening briefing in 25 days. Meet the team. See what we're up against with this guy, he added. Yeah, will do, I managed to reply, my burning desire to tell him to stick his pointless operation up his ass. Oh, who knows, maybe you'll be walking without that cane when I next see you, Ray quipped, breaking the obvious tension. I grunted a smile. Well, my recovery is going well, so we'll see. Goodbye, sir, I said, limping towards the door. Yeah, see you later, James. You look after yourself, yeah. Make sure you enjoy the rest of your leave, you hear me? He requested, with concern. Oh, absolutely, sir, absolutely. I arrived home later that night, placing the grocery bag on the counter. The clanking sound of the bottles bouncing off each other and the marble surface ringing through the silent house. I dug my hand into the bag and pulled out a bottle of Jameson, unscrewed the cap and chugged a fifth of the bottle down in one. The TV was still on. The news channel was on constantly these days, waiting for any news that would be of interest to me. I limped into the living room, towards the armchair. As I flopped in the seat, the alcohol making me go lightheaded and weak in the knees, I looked across at the TV and saw the Kansas City Police Commissioner standing shoulder to shoulder with the director of the FBI and the governor of Missouri. They were issuing a press conference outside City Hall. A crowd of reporters, photographers, and KC citizens were all in attendance, murmuring and snapping photos of them. I read the news tagline of Kathy Dean, new investigation findings revealed. I fumbled for the remote and turned up the volume. I swigged more of the booze and listened to the television. On behalf of myself, Director James Comey, and Governor Mike Parson, we thank you for coming out today. I promised you that we'd investigate allegations of institutionalized corruption in the KCPD and other Missouri public offices. I also promised I'd help to crack down on drugs, gangs, and violence in the city. Mike Parsons and I sought the help of the Bureau to conduct an impartial investigation into these matters, which has been taking place over the last few months. She placed her first prompt card down on the stand and began to read from the next one. Operation Appletree, the most clinical and intensive investigation into public and police corruption ever sanctioned on a federal level. The operation yielded many findings in regards to local gangs in the area. I can confirm we have a much bigger understanding of the local criminal enterprises in the city now, and Operation Appletree drove a dagger through the heart of their operation. This culminated with the seizure of a cargo plane attempting to receive a large cache of guns from a known terrorist cell in Northern Ireland. With the information gathered, we'll continue to drive our efforts and resources into removing the rest of these bottom feeders from our society. She then punched the air with enthusiasm as she essentially waged war on the remaining OCG members still at large. She dropped her card once more and read from the third. Now, the primary objective of Operation Appletree was to detect, identify, and establish institutionalized corruption within the ranks of the KCPD and the public offices of Missouri. I'm happy to announce that the investigation was an undeniable success. Its robust findings could not have been any clearer. There is no institutionalized corruption in Kansas City. She nodded her head, really to hammer home this statement. I just shook my head in contempt and turned the television off. I sat in the darkness, staring forward intently, chugging more and more liquor down my neck until the pain and frustration went away. Tears began to form as all I could see was Ruth. She was in front of me. Well, not really, but ever since her death, I saw her everywhere. She was wearing the clothes she'd died in, her face painted in her final expression, mouthing the words, "I'll wait for you." I quickly polished off the bottle until Ruth's image faded from my view. Seemed to be the only thing that worked. Once she'd gone, I was met with what was behind her. My wall, covered in photos, maps, copies of evidence files, witness statements, post-it notes, covering the entire surface with boxes of more of the same stacked everywhere. All of Robert Cassidy. I stood up and stumbled over to the wall, limping up to a specific picture of him in the center of the collage. I looked intently at the CCTV image of Robert Cassidy, spotted in a nightclub in the Winnipeg area. I examined his face, his expressions, his clothing, everything I could, because it distracted me from everything that was wrong with my life right now. I looked down at the unopened envelope addressed to me from the hospital back in Kansas. This was just one of many they'd sent since my last stay. I opened it and pulled out the letter. "Dear Mr. Rodriguez, we're contacting you once again due to the lack of response to our previous letters. As Dr. Khan explained to you during your initial scan upon your second admission after your assault, that a small tumor was discovered on a lymph node near your collarbone. We urge to either contact Dr. Khan or your local doctor to book an appointment to determine if the tumor is malignant or benign. Any more delay in action could result in the tumor growth." I screwed the letter up rather than reading it further. I threw it in the trash bin before it bounced off the large heap of other screwed up letters and landed on the floor, with around 5 others that suffered the same fate. Yeah, no time for that. I have work to do, I thought to myself, and once again focused in on the photo of Robert Cassidy. I stared into his eyes, and the eyes stared back. "Oh, I'm gonna get to you, you hear me? I'm gonna fucking get you, Robert Cassidy. I swear to God, even if it's the last thing I ever do." Well, my dear friends, even though I recorded that over the course of a couple of days, still absolutely exhausted, so please bear with me. I'm not going to have a long outro this evening. Brain all fuzzy, can't speak anymore. But of course I will be back again tomorrow night. Now, I was promising an hour and a half long story for Monday, but after this I might have to be delayed till Wednesday. But definitely something interesting tomorrow. Wow, it's done, finally. Yeah, well, hope you enjoyed the whole thing. If you'd like me to put it all together in one long video, I'm thinking of doing that and really, going to town on the sound effects and everything. But I need a little bit of a break from this now, as you can imagine. Thanks to Luke Hemingway for bearing with me. Brilliant story, man. Loved it. Loved every minute of it. And we will be working together very soon, won't we? I'm waffling now. Well, my dear friends, till the next time, very, very sweet dreams and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.